So we have another one from Zambuki.
A great name.
Yep. And I'm just using your taglines. I don't know your real names. So Zambuki. He had a couple questions. I think these are both great. The first one I want to get into is he has a question about basically engine braking during trail braking coming into a corner. So should you rely on engine braking or account for engine braking, or should you think about using neutral throttle?
So this is a really great question. I think there's so much confusion around this. And it's because a very prominent individual misunderstood another very prominent individual, published a book with their misunderstanding of the one or the other, and it just completely confused the whole trail braking thing. So let's kind of go into this a little bit. This comes up a lot. There's a lot of thinking that says that, or a lot of people who are still thinking based on the misunderstanding, there's so much value. We need to keep some throttle on during the entire cornering phase because it takes the slack out of the drive line. It the way we can talk about squat and pro squat and the way the rotation of the wheels, it actually pushes the rear tire into the ground. It basically raises the rear a little bit, so you get a little bit more cornering clearance. So there was a massive amount of confusion that you should be on the brakes even just a little bit during the braking phase.
Be on the throttle.
Be on the throttle, I'm sorry. Thank you for clarifying. And there are very few hard and fast rules in motorcycling, but one of them is we never, ever, 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 ever overlap throttle and front brake. We can overlap throttle and rear brake. There's a lot of places where we can do that. And in fact, that's where the confusion came from, because the person was talking about in the olden days of racing 500cc two-strokes, he would run the rear brake against the throttle as kind of a low buck wheelie control and a low buck traction control. So I think that's part one. We just kind of need to clarify that. Now, as far as if we're not overlapping throttle and front brake into the corner, there's a thinking that we can just engine brake or coast up into the corner. And we can, right? I think a better way to look at it as understand what each tool does so that you can make decisions based on your situation, right? Because the answer to almost every motorcycle question begins with it depends, right? So, when the front brake, right? The front brake by design, this is how motorcycles are designed, causes the motorcycle to want to slow down and change direction, right? Neutral throttle causes the motorcycle to maintain its radius. If we're in a corner, we go to neutral throttle, the line's going to stay the same. And then, of course, acceleration makes the bike stop turning and want to accelerate, right? So we can use each of those tools when we need them, right? On the street, there's all these corners that might be multiple radiuses and they get wide in the middle, or maybe they almost turn into a straightaway and then they tighten again. And there might be a lot of places where you might go to a full-on engine braking, a coast state, go to a neutral throttle state, maybe have to go back to the front brake. We want to just use the tool that we have available to us, right? Yeah.
So on the track, right? So you mentioned that you have all of these different tools. You've got your front brake, you've got your throttle, you can engine brake and just close the throttle and coast, but engine braking in. And the whole it depends thing, I know it feels like a cop-out, like a non-answer, but the reality is it does. And none of these tools are wrong or off limits necessarily. It just all depends on the situation you're in. So to the question, should I consider, because he asked us kind of a follow-up question of like, should I consider engine braking when I'm trail braking? And I would say you absolutely should.
No, I think it's part of the whole thing. It's part of the stability. In fact, we get a lot of students that come in and they've been taught to squeeze the clutch so that they only rely on the front brake. And you're giving away a lot of control, not to mention that when you release the clutch back out, the wheel's going to hop. But engine braking or coasting is an important part of stability. It's an important part of the entire equation. Yeah. But on the racetrack, your objective is basically to get to the slowest part of the corner as quickly as you can and then accelerate away from it. So you're just unlikely to be using a much engine braking coasting phase at all.
So we've talked about this once before, but I think it's worth bringing up again. So when you go to the brakes on the track, everything is extremely deliberate on the track. I don't want to say it's aggressive or it's hard. It's just very deliberate, right? At this point you stop, you close the throttle, and at this point you apply the brakes and so forth. Everything's very deliberate. we use the engine braking whether we want to or not by just not letting the clutch out or not opening up the throttle, right? So the engine brake is happening when we're in the braking phase. But when you're on the track, you may be braking so hard with the front end on the front tire that the rear tire is hardly doing any work.
Yeah, the rear tire might just be
skimming across barely, right? So when you're setting up the bike for the track, especially for racing, so, and I keep saying racing, but what I mean is if your main priority is your lap time, let's just say that, because some track day guys who don't race are very concerned with these same things. But if that's your goal, you do want engine braking, and you kind of want as much engine braking as you can before you hit the limit of the rear is now locking and sliding and causing instability, or I should say causing too much sliding, because some guys want a little bit. Or you kind of balance that by using the rear brake yourself and controlling some of that input. But there's very few guys who want zero engine braking. In fact, zero engine braking, and a lot of these with these electronic throttles and stuff, you can set up with extremely low to nearly none.
You can program it in, and I think like that was what made Honda's V5 so special. Is one of the bank of 3, they would feed a little bit of fuel into it to mitigate engine braking and rear wheel hop.
Yeah, to control it. Yep.
Yeah.
And so you kind of want to find the balance of, am I getting as much rear braking from the engine braking as I can without causing instability, without causing sliding or locking, in order to help me get the bike slowed down? Because if you think about when you're braking with the front tire versus the rear tire, if the rear tire is helping you slow down, it actually kind of keeps you in line to a point, right? It's almost like, imagine putting an anchor out behind you. It actually keeps you fairly in line while it's braking. Again, to a point. If it's so much that it's locking and sliding, now you are losing some stability. But historically, the guys who really liked running extremely low engine braking, it's because they came from a 2-stroke background.
Right.
And they're used to a bike that has very, very little, if any, engine braking. And as soon as they had engine braking, it just threw off how they like to ride. So long answer here, but if you're riding a modern 4-stroke engine sport bike, engine braking can help you. You shouldn't try to mitigate it. You definitely shouldn't roll into corners with the clutch pulled in. I would not recommend anybody do that. I don't think there's any scenario.
It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. I guess if we're going to throw another hard and fast rule in there is, don't make that your standard approach to a corner. Don't make that your plan.
Right.
I mean, there are situations where I'm going to squeeze the clutch and coast in. Like there was a situation where there was snow.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Right? Like kind of situation. But I think, the bigger question, and I'm gonna add on to this because we get another question that's very similar to this. And riders who have these big torquey motorcycles, right? Maybe you have a Ducati V2, you're on a cruiser with a big lumpy V-twin. So many times engine braking is plenty to slow down to an appropriate entrance speed or a speed where you're comfortable, right? It is still slowing the motorcycle. And to that, I would say, if you're doing that, and I think that's fine in a lot of situations, I do it all the time, you have to be prepared or have the skill set to be able to go to the front brake should you need to. Mm-hmm. The problem isn't necessarily engine braking into corners. The problem is relying solely on engine braking into cornering. Because if that corner tightens up, or if it tightens up and goes downhill, or whatever the case may be, and I'm relying solely on engine braking, what are my options? Do I add more coast?
I love that.
Do I add more off throttle, right? So I need to have the skill set and the training and the technique to be able to okay, I'm engine braking into this corner. I'm very happy doing this. I'm very comfortable. Oh, it's tightening. I have the skills I need to go to the front brake.
Yeah. And to that, big singles, big twins, these things that have a lot of engine braking, and riders who ride these a lot are very used to the engine braking and how it feels coming down, like when speed's starting to lower. You get less effective engine braking the lower the RPMs become. Right. So at really high RPMs, when you just shut off the throttle, you get a lot of engine braking because of how many RPMs you're turning. As you slow down, you get less and less and less engine braking. So just be mindful of that. And that's where, guys who do this a lot, big cruisers, I hear this all the time. I watch this happen. They're going into the corner and they just use a downshift to bring the revs up and get more engine braking, essentially. So just be mindful of that. Like, it's not wrong to do it. Like you said, it's totally fine to do it, and it's appropriate a lot of times just from ease and smoothness. But just be prepared to use the brakes when you need to on the way into a corner in case something surprises you.